Social Security is featuring more prominently as China is getting old. By the end of 2018, China had nearly 250 million senior citizens at the age of 60 or above, accounting for about 17% of the country's population. How should China provide better elderly care? And what can we learn from welfare societies in the West or in Japan to cope with the diminishing demographic dividends? India has a formidable young labor force as its economy catches up very quickly. But Indians will have to look to the future. Here in the Beijing studio, I'm happy to be joined by Claire Pearson, former chair of the British Chamber of Commerce in China, and Hu Naijun, associate professor from the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences. We will also talk to Professor M.D. Nalapad, vice chair of Manipal University's Advanced Research Group in New Delhi, and Professor Takasato Watanabe from Dorchester University in Kyoto. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Naijun and Claire, do we seem to have a conflict between corporate competitiveness and social security? Since according to the recently concluded two sessions, the Lianghui, employers will be able to lower their contribution rate to the basic pension insurance for urban workers from the current 20% to 16%. What do you think of the alleged shortage of social security funds?
Well, from the short run's point of view, I think the lower rate of the employer's contribution is affordable, because in the last year, in 2018, we have about 4.6 trillion RMBs of pension accumulation, which can be paid to pensions for more than a year, even if we do not have any pension contributions in this year. So I think in the short run, there's no problem for the decrease of the employer's contribution rate. There's no problem. But from the long run's point of view, I think the future's problem should be paid more attention to.
Claire, I was told that by the year 2020 in the United Kingdom, social security funds will no longer be protected by the British government. Why?
I think the government is very concerned about people living longer in the UK. Improvements in the health service mean that the demographic changes mean that we can't really afford to give people the pension they need. So the government is saying, Chancellor Nigel Hammond said that after 2020, the pension fund will no longer be a protected area. So I think the UK is really searching on this topic. They've just recently passed a law, meaning that employers do have to make a contribution. People do have to start a pension fund. Employees and employers have to contribute. But that's a very recent change in 2018.
Let me talk to Professor M.D. Nalapad, who's standing by in New Delhi. Hello, Professor Nalapad. Are you concerned with social security funds in India, where you have a large young labor force, but you have to look to the future, because what we have as problems in China today will be your future?
There's no doubt about that, but I'm also more hopeful for the simple reason that if you look at the 18th century or 17th century or even the 20th century, the technological innovations that were brought in ensured a better life for a large number of people. Let's not forget that China, your country, about 600 million people have now graduated to a much better life in the last 30 years in China, and that's happened in India also. So the fact is, supposing, for example, we're able to store sunlight better, supposing we're able to grow food better, and I'm sure that there will be techniques worked out to grow food. For example, using the oceans, perhaps, to ensure that food comes in. I think technology can be a solution to what we are saying, which is the problem of scarcity because of current technology and current methods.
Currently, given the young average age of the Indian population, we seem to have a little to learn from India. However, we have enough reasons to thank our Indian friends. That is the pharmaceutical industry. Following the huge box office success of Dying to Survive, Premier Li Keqiang agreed and promised to reduce our drug prices drastically, and part of that measure that has been rolled out is to import more such useful drugs for a far cheaper price. Now, we are getting old, and I mean, medical care would no longer be a serious problem, or at least as serious as the immediate past. Now, what can you tell us about the aging population in your country? Do you think this is a remote problem yet? Professor Nalapat?
Well, I'd like to say that we have a problem because we are still a very poor country. The fact of the matter is that China is a 5 times bigger economy than we are, and the population of China is about equal to the population of India. So the real problem we are facing is ensuring rapid growth. India definitely needs double-digit growth. It needs that growth to ensure that 12 to 13 million new jobs get created for the young every year. It needs that growth to ensure that the 300 million people in India who have very, very poor standard of life graduate to a better standard of life. So the challenge before India, very frankly, is higher growth. And if we don't meet that challenge, a young population is not going to be an asset. It's going to be as much of a problem as older people.
Professor Nalapat, what kind of a care should be taken for the aging population in your country, since the number of nursing homes in India won't be as big as in China? And therefore, where do the elderly people in India, such as retirees and pensioners, want to enjoy the care? In their home, in their family, to enjoy the care of the children, or they prefer to be sent to nursing homes?
Well, in India, definitely sociologically, they'd prefer to be with their families. There's no doubt about it. And recently, the government has announced a universal health care plan. There are some problems regarding the funding of that plan, but it's a step in the right direction. As much as possible, if the elderly can be in a situation where people who love them, people who care for them are around them, then healthcare can be both cheaper and also made much more comfortable for the elderly. So in India, definitely, nursing home is not the preferred option. Being at home with loved ones is the preferred option.
One striking hallmark, Professor Nalapat, for a transformation from a traditional economy to a market-oriented economy remains the free flow of labor force, and that means the possible disintegration of a traditional family. Is that a big problem of great urgency for the Indians? In China, for example, not only children, but elderly people in their millions are being left behind, and this has generated many front-page stories.
Well, I'd like to say that it's very important to ensure that the philosophy of growth and the philosophy of satisfaction changes. Now, for example, if you have a family where everybody has got more than one car, for example, it's absolutely meaningless. You have some families who have got 100,000 times more items than they ever need in their whole lifetime. So I think it's very important to understand the kind of blind consumerism that we have seen in Western society, the kind of greed that we saw causing 2008 financial collapse. That has to be stopped, and therefore I think along with physical infrastructure, along with finances, there has to be a change in thought processes so that people feel I'm a success, not because I got 10 cars, but because I've helped 10 people.
That makes sense indeed. Let me cross over to Professor Takasato Watanabe, a professor from Doshisha University in Kyoto. Now, some research suggests that in India, 3/4 of the elderly live in or live with their children. About 65% of Japanese aged 65 and older still live with their adult children, a rate higher than in any other industrialized country. Professor Watanabe, is that a challenge or a blessing for the elderly in Japan?
That is very serious problem for Japanese society, as the problem to be settled by the government together with the private fields people. Because in addition to that, in the urban area, there are jobs for the young people. So young people, they don't want to stay with their parents and also grandparents. And the gap between rural area, agricultural area, and urban area is very big. So Japan, the government is going to solve those problems, but the people, they don't want to, believe in the statistics given by the government, because in Japan now, that this is a very serious problem, this belief in the governmental statistics. And seriously, more seriously, as you have said, the generation in the 40s especially, nearly a half of them, they are not married. Or I dare say they cannot get married because of the housing problems in the urban areas. So also the medical problems for the elderly people, if they get old and they get seriously ill, there are no doctors, medical cares around their living areas. So in the very small portion of the society, rich people, they are okay. But more than half of the Japanese people are put into psychologically worries very much. This is very complex for Japanese. At appearance, Japanese society is okay, but crimes is getting bigger and bigger in number because of the gaps of the urban area and agricultural area.
Here is an issue of how to look after the lonely hearts of the elder generation. Now, do you think with the labor shortage in Japan, an aging society, you will turn to robots in the age of artificial intelligence? Because we all have the serious shortage of labor force in, training nurses.
Yes. In Japan, of course, you see, the government is making efforts to increase the university students and get a better quality in the education and technological areas. But in ordinary, housing living area, there are not so many youngsters who can work in the small-sized factories. So another problem has appeared. We need younger generation, young people, laborers, workers from other countries, from Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, mostly from the Southeast Asian countries. So those people are put into very hard life in Japan. So this is called the immigrant program. This is very serious for Japanese society because they are not given the better life in Japan, though they were promised only in letters when they were living in their own countries. But in Japan, by the economic reasons, or some, vicious circles of the population in Japan, the employers, they don't give the promised conditions of working for the working people. So this gives very bad, imbalance between the wish of the young scholars, young workers, young people from the outside to Japan. So this makes Japanese society very unstable now.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Interesting.
Professor Watanabe, for sharing with us the concerns of the Japanese society. Perhaps the elderly would need more of companion animals and robots to reduce their loneliness. Let's come back to examine the situation in China, Naijun. Experts say that China's nominal enterprise contributions to social insurance schemes, about 30%, quote unquote, are comparatively high, exceeding Japan, South Korea, US, and some European countries. Does that mean China may have space for reduction? And is it a legitimate request for the government to increase public spending?
Well, I think the question of the future finance of any kind of services to the elder care is not very sure, because as we have heard from the professors of other countries, there are so many factors to be considered in this system. We have to consider our future economic development, that is to say the GDP growth. We have to consider our future prices, for example the CPIs, and we also have to consider the future demographic change. From my point of view, I think the burden of any kind of services is increasing day after day, because in the future we have more and more people aging 60 and above. However, the structure of our aging population is becoming even more serious, because right now we have a population, although we have 250 million people aging 60 and above, the majority of them are aging 60 to 70, which means, yes, the people in China, the majority of the people are very old, but our population are not that old comparing with Japan or Germany or some other Western countries. But in the future, in less than 20 to 30 years, the majority of Chinese elder population will be aging 75 above. So we, currently speaking, we need pensions to pay the older people's daily consumptions. But in the future, we have to consider healthcare. We have to consider nursing, we have to consider long-term care, even something like that. So I think the future finance to the elder care services will become larger and larger. However, whether we can afford it, it is not easy to say, because we have to consider the future economic prospect and GDP growth.
Claire, Western democracies do deserve credit for their respect for human rights. However, look at the anger of yellow vest demonstrators in the streets of France. When President Emmanuel Macron wanted social insurance to be raised, that could be a burden on the younger generation. Therefore, they took to the street in protest. So, as China is getting old so quickly, do you think we should learn from welfare societies in the West?
I think a balance has to be reached. I mean, if you give tax incentives for people to contribute to commercial pension funds, you'll get three benefits. First of all, you'll get more coverage. People who do business think about the future. They think about their future. They'll invest in that if there's a tax break. Number two, you'll also decrease pressure on health services, because if people have got pension cover, they're going to be less demanding in the hospital. And really the third area where I think tax incentives to contribute to commercial pensions in China could have a benefit is that people will take their future into their own hands. And you'll increase economic stability in the country. You talk about the yellow vests in France. Yeah, they've still got time to protest. They've still got leisure. So I think that you know, in the UK, for example, 3% of shares on the stock market are owned by pension funds. The smartest people we all know in the City of London, they always work for a pension fund. Because let's face it, behavioural science means that if I'm working in Starbucks, I'm 26, I'm going to spend my money on a night out and a holiday in Hainan. I'm not going to go, hey, I want to put 10% into my pension fund. Not when I'm 26. I can't imagine what it's going to be like when I'm 80. The government has to enforce a degree of saving by taking 10%. The country with the happiest pensioners, Netherlands. Now, the reason the Netherlands get it so right is they take 10% from all the employees. So whether you're working for the police or you're selling pot, you get a pension when you retire. So and the Netherlands also works well because in the 2008 economic downturn, their pension funds didn't plummet. Why? The government had the freedom to demand a higher contribution from employers during global economic difficulties. So even though the ROI, the return on investment on pension funds wasn't as high, the government could still reward people on retirement. What governments need to do is they need to allocate their smartest investors to look after their oldest vulnerable people. We all know that the situation in China is patchy. You know, I was just talking to my friend, she's from Shenyang. She's a really hard-working one-child kid. And she's looking after mom, she's looking after brother, she's looking after brother's kid. You know, you have really responsible young people in China, and I really respect the Confucian system that encourages children to care for their parents. But you've got to take the weight off those kids. They're my peers, and I kind of feel for them because the pension system in the UK, the pension system in the Netherlands, in Western democracies, does free young people to be more creative in their careers. You know, my friends here, they cannot take a break from work. It is 996 because they really have no option because they're contributing their parents. I like what the government's doing, Yang Rei. I really like it. The fact that we're having a discussion on pension means that it's top of the table after the 2 sessions. So, you know, I think it's a really good discussion. I mean, I don't like what happened in the UK. You know, we used to have a good pension. Now, can you live on £125 a week in the UK? I know it's 125 renminbi in China, but in the UK, 125 pounds doesn't go that far. But 125 renminbi in Guizhou, 2 Starbucks. Do you know what I mean? It needs to improve for the rural workers because we all know, like, the pension coverage in China is patchy. 78% in Shanghai, 13% in Tibet. If you're in the countryside, goodness help you. If you're in the southwest or Yunnan, you're going to get about 35% people taking up a pension because poor people don't put into the pension pot. Rich people do. Give them a tax break and they can cover the rural poor. Same problem in the UK. We have wealth disparity like nobody's business. You know, we've just announced that schools are going to be the 4th emergency service for people who don't feed their kids. That's a repercussion of elderly poverty.
President Xi Jinping says the Chinese government is ready to lift all of the population out of poverty by the year 2020. And this is one of the 3 major tasks on his agenda. The other 2 being prevention of financial risks as well as environmental protection. Now, with the massive migration from underdeveloped areas to more prosperous urban areas, so many elderly people are being left behind and so many children are being left behind. What do you think of the national medical insurance policy that is supposed to cover the whole of the country? Do you think we have a very acute shortage of such funds, and what can be done to alleviate concerns of those poor elderly people in the rural areas?
I think we shall divide people into different situations. Claire has said very right that I think it is called state basic pension in UK, which will pay the elder people about £125 a week. And in China, we do have the same system, such as rural and urban people will receive a basic pension about 125 RMB a month. But that is not a social insurance. That is directly paid by the finance of China. While to the people working in the urban areas, such as you and other people, they do have to contribute to a social insurance system. So you can see there are different situations and people are in different systems. And I think in China, in the future, we should stick to this basic principle that we should help the poor. Because some people working in urban areas have very low income. They can't afford to social insurance contribution. So they do not have pension, they do not have health care, and to these people, the government budget should give them a share. They don't have to pay contribution. They just given this kind of insurance. They just kind of these benefits, but on a very low income. However, to the majority of the people who working in the urban area and have a higher income, they should pay more contributions to the social insurance system. And some of them may even have commercial insurance. They will have their own savings. That is what we call a 3-tier pension system in both in UK and in China or in any other country. So I think we should give situations a different arrangement for them.
Jun, to what extent do you think China's high savings rate and traditional attitudes of filial piety may help alleviate the pressure and demand of pension insurance?
Well, from family's point of view, I think in the near future, a single family can't afford this kind of elder care because of the drop of our fertility rate. Back in 1950 and 60s, every family had about 5 to 6 children on average. But in nowadays, each family only have 1 child. That is fortunate. some people do not have any children at all. So in the future, the old people will have less and less children to give them care. So I do not think home care is a sustainable way. And as to the prospect of what is your first?
Well, we do have sympathy. We do have
parenting.
strong sympathy for a young couple who will have to look after at least 4 parents, to say nothing of their 2 children, with the relaxation of the family planning policy. But do you think we are facing the immediate danger of a family disintegration? Or do you think with the use of smartphones, you can talk to a parent hundreds of miles away instead of going back home during holidays from time to time? I mean, this proves to be a dilemma for the young and the old alike.
Okay. So I think what we need in the future is a social network of elder care services. Not the family, not only the government, but also the whole society taken into together to deliver any kind of services to the elder people, from their daily nurses, from their daily living services, to their health care, to their long-term care, etc., etc. So we need a social network to deliver this kind of services. Then the finance of this kind of services should also complicated from the employer, from the people themselves, from the government, from charity, etc., etc.
But Claire, you know, China is getting old, and we have the low fertility rate, as Najim said. Do you think this is a catch-22 situation? Social security network is, of course, something that deserves credit, and of course, it's politically correct to say that we should take our future into our own hands. But China is not ready yet.
I like the term social security network. I think China also has very strong social networks. I think friendships here, families, they create circles of loyalty which care for each other that is incomparable with the West. You know, I was on crutches last week. Friends WeChat each other, meet you at the airport, carry your bag. This isn't even my family. This is just friendship. So I think that the loyalty of friendship and the care of family in China often compensates for the lack of the social security ecosystem that other countries have to rely on. But more can be done, because I think you highlight the point well. You know, there's more pressure on the one child who's sometimes looking after 4 parents in a marriage. And I've noticed in Beijing, in the service departments, they're being used as what I would call elderly care homes. And if you ever ask somebody who's old, do you want to leave home? Not really. I agree with you. A social security network where they can be visited at home but remain in familiar surroundings is the ideal. And I think China's at an interesting tipping point with its new foreign NGO law and the encouragement of local charities. I think there needs to be sort of agencies who are moving between the elderly who are suffering from poverty, and sometimes young people who are suffering from loneliness in urban environments. So I think increasingly we need these agents of exchange, which can be through NGOs, can be through charities, can be through government intervention. So I think there's going to be a lot more stakeholders in the game to create a supportive ecosystem for the elderly in China.
Given the multiple challenges arising from the aging population in China, politicians, policymakers, and entrepreneurs perhaps are all clearly aware of the urgency and importance of social security network, and they need to work in close partnership to reduce the drag on a society which is fast exhausting the labor dividends that we used to rely upon in intensive, labor-intensive industries. Hence the transformation from labor-intensive to capital-intensive and technology-intensive industries in this country. And President Trump doesn't like this idea in China. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.